From humble beginnings in the gaming industry to directly competing with gaming giants of the time, today we'll be discussing the dramatic rise and the tragic fall of Sega. Let's talk about it.
I'm out of here.
Sega, a game company that found its beginnings back in the early 60s when Sega acquired the assets of its predecessors, Service Games of Japan. Shortly after, they would come to be known as Sega Enterprises, after acquiring Rosen Enterprises, an importer of coin-based arcade games and manufacturer of slot machines as well as jukebox machines. Fast forward to the 1980s, when Sega began to develop home gaming consoles, but struggled against competing giants such as Nintendo. At the time, Sega knew that the only way they would ever come close to competing with Nintendo would be to expand their operations beyond the East with a heavy focus on the US. Sega, or rather the then president of Sega of America, Michael Katz, would decide to rebrand Sega's first home console, which was mostly popular back in the East, known as the Sega Mega Drive. This would become what we now know as the Sega Genesis. At a time when Nintendo was dominating the gaming industry with their extensive catalog of family-friendly games and a fun-loving mustached mascot, Sega knew that they needed to resonate more with its Western consumers by developing their very own iconic mascot that would become the face of the company. This task would be handed down to artist Naoto Oshima, who would then create the blue hedgehog we've all come to love. Sonic. Sega would then make the decision to include a copy of Sonic with every new purchase of the Sega Genesis, increasing the sales with a whopping additional 15 million units sold.
Nice.
At this point, Sega would become a more powerful force in the console wars, and would go on to match Nintendo's sales in the US by 1992. Sega went from just 800 million in sales to a mind-blowing 3.6 billion in sales between 1989 in 1993, thus finally solidifying itself as a top competitor. But this is where Sega's short-lived success will begin to crumble with the release of the Sega CD back in 1993, which was an add-on device for the Sega Genesis. This new add-on would allow the consumer to listen to their favorite music, as well as play Sega's new choose-your-own-adventure games that utilize live-action footage. The only problem, however, was that only the consumers that already owned the Sega Genesis could use the new Sega CD device, therefore making it impossible for Sega to increase the market share value with its release. It's worth mentioning that instead of focusing their efforts on developing better games and expanding their very limited catalog, they instead opted to focus on the new Sega CD add-on device. Shortly after, Sega would face severe backlash upon release of their live-action game for the Sega CD, Night Trap, which features some sorts of CTV footage of teenage girls struggling to free themselves from what appeared to be home invaders. Weird fetish, Sega, but okay. In fact, Night Trap's infamous bathroom scene was cited in a US congressional hearing back in 1993, led by the former United States Senator Joe Lieberman. Lieberman argued that Night Trap promoted violence towards women and should not be placed in the hands of younger audiences. To make matters worse, former Nintendo of America chairman Howard Lincoln would testify at Night Trap's hearing and stated that
Nintendo is just as concerned about the issue of violence, whether in movies, television, or video games, as anyone in this room. Of course, every entertainment executive tells Congress that. But Nintendo can back it up.
Funny enough, however, decades later in 2018, Night Trap would be released to the Nintendo Switch. Hypocrites. To make matters even worse for Sega, these guys just can't seem to catch a fucking break, can they, man? But to make matters even worse for Sega, a new, up-to-date gaming console would emerge from the shadows and took the industry by the balls, the Sony PlayStation, which opted for slick new 3D graphics rather than the already saturated 2D platform market. Today, Sega exists only as a video game company working on games for today's popular consoles. And that wraps it up for today. What do you guys think about Sega and their decisions? What could they have done better? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Be sure to like, subscribe, and tap that little notification thingy down there so you never miss an upload. And remember,
An adventure's no fun if it's too easy.